Hey, today we're going to have fun learning and making one of the most famous drinks in all of Portugal, Ginjinha. This is a drink that's seen throughout Portugal from Algarve all the way up to Porto, and it has a tremendous history. It's been around since the 16th century. They believe it was made by monks that had an oversupply of sour cherries. One of the most famous brands of Ginjinha is this Espineta. Espineta is delicious. I tried a few. It's definitely one of my favorites. But they're all pretty good. But you'll see throughout the country, different localities or principles make it slightly different. Highly recommend if you go to Portugal to see the town of Óbidos. Óbidos is an old castle town surrounded still by the massive wall. And in the interior, it's really known for their Ginjinha. Throughout even that little area of Óbidos, they'll be selling it in little outlets throughout the whole community, and each one has their own unique recipe. And you could go around tasting it for $1, and if you like it, buy the whole bottle. So what is Ginjinha? Well, first of all, Ginja, it almost sounds the same, but Ginja is the sour cherry. And I'll put the proper scientific name just in case you want to try to pick up a sour cherry tree. Ginja is the cherry. Ginjinha is usually what they refer to the drink. Ginjinha is a pretty simple recipe. Aguardente. Aguardente is an amalgamation of agua, water, and ardente, which means like to burn. So it's like their fire water. Traditionally, they believe the Ginjinha was made from grape pomace, or bagaço is how you say it in Portuguese. And it's the pomace, this bagaço, is what's left over when they make wine. So they crush grapes, squeeze them, use a press. A lot of force is put to get as much juice as you can and flavor out of those grapes. But afterwards, this pumice is kind of dry, and it's a lot of times just put out in the field. But there's some places, like in Italy, they call it grappa. In Portugal, they call it bagaço. And what they do with this bagaço is they'll add more water to it and mix it up, and then also add maybe a little more sugar, because they squeezed out a lot of that sugar, and they're basically making like a second cut of wine. So they're going to let that ferment, but then that second cut of wine, they're going to distill and make aguardente bagaço, that type of aguardente. There's a few different types of aguardente. Besides bagaço, there's also aguardente de vinca, which is basically what we call brandy. It's that first cut. You're making wine, and when that wine has fermented to its usually alcohol stage of around probably 12% alcohol, they'll put it in a still, or in Brazil they call it an alembic, and they'll put that through the still and get out hard alcohol or brandy on the other side of it. And all brandies, you'll see aguardente that is clear. All alcohol that comes out of a still is always clear white, whether it's tequila, rum. Every time you see a darker, like rum or brandy or bourbon, that means, or tequila, it's been aged in oak or some kind of barrel, because that's the only way alcohol gets color, is from a container that it's put into. So you can use a white aguardente vinca or a darker aguardente vinca. Madeira, it's really common to have aguardente de cana. And this aguardente de cana is aguardente from sugarcane, which basically is rum, all throughout the Caribbean. And Madeira has a huge history of sugar production. And so in Madeira, they make aguardente de cana. Last time I was in Portugal, my dad's godson, Luciano, hello if you watch this, but he makes a great homemade ginja. So how do you drink this Ginjinha? There is some history to it, where it's almost always served in a shot glass. And although it's in a shot glass, it's never drank as a shot of like tequila. It's usually always sipped on. And sometimes more modern version, they'll put it in a chocolate cup. And the one thing they'll always ask you when you, especially the places in Lisbon, when you go get a Ginjinha, they'll ask you com elas or sem elas, meaning do you want it with cherries or without cherries? And it's pretty traditional to have one of the cherries from the bottle put into the little shot glass. You probably can't see it in the video, but there are, maybe the bottom quarter of this bottle is full of cherries. So that's what we're talking about. They'll scoop that out, put it in the shot glass. It's a really cool, unique experience to try this, whether you're in Óbidos or Lisbon, because often the places are tiny. Maybe there's enough room for like 3 people in there, or maybe there's no room at all. It's just like on a sidewalk, a beautiful old building. There'll be like a window. You walk up, you just get your Ginjinha, have a few words with the bartender, and just be on your way. So to begin with, this recipe varies a lot. I looked at about probably at least 10 different recipes. Some things that vary, about half of them use granulated white sugar, half use brown sugar. I'm using about 50-50 of each. The hard alcohol, again, that could be like a white rum to a white brandy to a regular brandy that's been aged in a barrel. So the alcohol could vary a little bit. They almost all have cinnamon sticks. Some of them had cloves, and some of them, the ratio of sugar changes a little bit. So we'll get started. You know, when you make this, say you probably want to let it rest in the jar for at least 3 months. And, you know, at that time, taste it. And if you think it needs more sweetness, you always can make a simple syrup out of just heating up, you know, a quarter cup of water, quarter cup of sugar, and just pouring it in if you need to sweeten it up. If it's too sweet, you could add a little more hard alcohol and a little more wine to dilute that sugar ratio. So, you know, there's some options to play with it. But like I said, every family has its own recipe, so this isn't hard science here. I'm going to lightly heat up the wine to blend in my sugar, just so it melts. Sugar melts way better when it's warm. 1 cup of red wine. Heating up the red wine to dissolve the sugar. So you can see there's white sugar, but then there's some brown sugar on the bottom. And again, you don't need to bring this to a boil, I mean, probably not even a simmer, but like I said, sugar definitely dissolves better when it's warm. Just let it fully dissolve. And at this point, I could put my cinnamon sticks in there also. So I do have cloves, so I'm going to add a couple of those. If you want to check out some of my other videos on famous Portuguese drinks, check out the one I made on Poncha, the drink from Madeira, or also the Nikita, which is a drink that's become more popular in Madeira. Okay, now for this recipe, I'm going to add 4 cups of sour cherries. Probably about 3 of the recipes say to go ahead and put some of the stems in there, like leave the cherries with the stems. Again, stems sometimes, like in grapes, sometimes they will leave a few stems or the seeds because those provide tannin. So I'm guessing that's kind of like to give it like a little backbone. Tannin is like what you taste in tea or coffee. It's kind of like that astringent feel, but a lot of times that's pleasing, especially when something is sweet. If you have extra cherries, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting, you know, a couple more cups in, because again, you always could dilute it if you thought there was too much cherry flavor. Can't imagine that's going to be a problem. Sugar wine mixture is cooling off. I'll put in my 4 cups of brandy. And I chose an aged brandy just because I think it'll have a little more complexity than like a white rum. And as I was expecting, I don't quite have enough room in this container. So I do have a second container ready. Cinnamon in there. I am going to put this whole mixture here. I just want to make sure it's all blended up well, like that whole sugar wine mixture. If your container was big enough, you wouldn't have to go through this little side step. So now we kind of want to get equal parts cherries in both. And that is it. And then it just could go in a cool, dark place. You don't have to keep it in your refrigerator because there's enough alcohol in here to act as a preservative. And just for reference, this has 22% alcohol, which is about half of the strength of like just brandy. By using brandy but diluting it with sugar and then with the red wine and then water is going to get pulled out of the cherry, you're going to get closer to something that's about 22% alcohol. That's it. Again, I like the idea of doing 2 jars or maybe multiple jars, because that way you could try one after 3 months and then let another one go for, you know, half a year or a full year. However long you decide to steep the Ginja, could be, like I said, 3 months up to a year. I would recommend filtering it. So either you could, you know, get a funnel with a cheesecloth, or maybe like one of those metal coffee filters that are really fine, because there will be some sediment that'll probably gather, and then pour that into whatever bottle of your choosing. And then you could add, right now it's packed with cherries, but maybe quarter fill your bottle with cherries. But I think that is it. Also, don't forget to check out my recipes on the website, justcookwithmichael.com. They're much easier to print out from the website. It's much easier to search. You can search by breads, desserts, Azores, Madeira, search by the type of protein like pork or fish. Thanks for joining me. Now go cook and go drink with someone you love.